After Keith Yandle broke the NHL's most consecutive games played record last season, this year, the record was broken yet again, as the new NHL Iron Man is someone who fans and players around the league would have never expected to play over 990 games in a row. The now 35-year-old from Madison, Wisconsin, Phil Kessel. If you weren't a hockey fan and saw Phil on the street, you likely wouldn't think that he looks like your typical professional athlete. But Kessel has spent his whole career proving people wrong, and has currently scored 400 goals in the NHL, has been to multiple All-Star games, is the NHL's new Iron Man, and has won 2 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins and was an instrumental piece in both victories. Phil the Thrill is one of the true characters in the game of hockey and has become one of the most likable players in the NHL and a fan favorite across the league. After an extremely successful career with the U.S. national team and then in college with the University of Minnesota, the 5th overall pick in the 2006 NHL entry draft by the Boston Bruins came into the league as one of the top prospects in hockey. Kessel would spend 3 seasons with Boston, showing flashes of excellence, specifically on offense, and truly breaking out as an elite goal scorer in the 2008-09 season, where he'd score 36 goals and 60 points in 70 games with the Bees. But after the Bruins lost in the second round of the playoffs that year, they would decide to ship off Phil Kessel to the Toronto Maple Leafs for 2 first-round picks and an additional second. Under the bright lights of Toronto was where Phil would get a ridiculous amount of media coverage and would also become an NHL All-Star during his time there. Kessel continued to be one of the best goal scorers in the NHL while with Toronto, and in his 6 years with the team, he would lead the team in points each of those seasons. But for as good as Phil was in those days, it was never enough for the fan base, and especially for the Toronto media, as the Leafs would make the playoffs only once in the Kessel era, and would lose in the first round in a heartbreaking 7-game series to none other than the Boston Bruins. During his days as a Leaf, Kessel had multiple run-ins with reporters, at times firing back, and trying to defend his teammates like fellow leader Dion Phaneuf.
I think the way the media treats Dion Phaneuf in this city is embarrassing. I think a lot of media here should be embarrassed.
One reporter would even go so far as to fabricate a story about Phil frequently going to a hot dog vendor, and in the first sentence of an article he wrote in the Toronto Sun right after Kessel was traded to Pittsburgh, said, quote, "The hot dog vendor who parks daily at Front and John Streets just lost his most reliable customer." Well, at the time, most couldn't believe this disrespectful article. It would end up looking even more foolish and only added more to Phil's legend, when after the Penguins won the Stanley Cup the next season, he posted a photo of himself out on a golf course eating hot dogs out of the Stanley Cup, an ultimate slam dunk on this Toronto reporter, and a viral moment that most fans will never forget. Phil the Thrill appeared to be exactly what the Penguins needed to get them over the hump, and would of course win back-to-back cups in 2016 and 2017. And while most thought Kessel would play with either superstar center Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin, he ended up being the star of his own fantastic line, the HBK line, with Carl Hagelin, Nick Bonino, and of course, Phil Kessel. In the 2016 Cup win, this line absolutely dominated opponents and made the Pens virtually unstoppable, with 3 lines all producing like top lines. Hagelin had 16 points, Bonino had 18, and Kessel led Pittsburgh in both goals and points, with 10 goals and 22 points in the 24 games, and could have easily won the Conn Smythe's playoff MVP. In the 2017 run, the HBK line wasn't quite as effective, but Phil still produced like a superstar and had 23 points in the Penguins' 25 playoff games. Kessel would play with Pittsburgh for 2 more years after the Cup wins, including putting up a career-high 92 points in the 2017-18 regular season. But after getting knocked out in 4 games during the 2019 playoffs, the organization felt it was time to move on from Phil and traded him to the Arizona Coyotes. While the Coyotes haven't had a great last few seasons, and Phil's play has dropped off a little bit as well, he's still the same guy he's seemingly always been. Kessel seems to be so beloved by hockey fans not only because he's relatable and seems very much like a regular guy, but also because he's a breath of fresh air. He's a guy that hasn't always had the best eating habits, according to his former GM Brian Burke, but is also not something that he's ever let affect his game on the ice. And not only is he well liked by so many of the fans, but it's also his teammates and former teammates that love telling stories about him and love to be around him. James Van Riemsdyk, who used to play with Kessel in Toronto, talks about lining up against Phil for the first time as opponents and how he said,
he looks over at me and he goes, James, don't forget who made you a player in this league.
In that whiny little voice.
Phil the Thrill is truly one of the most interesting players we've seen in the NHL over the past few decades and has become an iconic figure to many because of his personality and the way he approaches life in the game of hockey. Now with the Vegas Golden Knights, in a place where he can golf, play some poker, and also be a part of another good hockey team, he is surely enjoying the game and everything that comes with being an NHLer. He really is just a nice guy that tries hard and loves the game. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and we will see you in the next one.